And are you refreshed? Good. Now what?
My heart's kind of pumping.
That's a good thing.
I'm sorry, I just had some M&Ms. So I wanted to be in the seat, but I was releasing the resistance, and I was thinking to myself back there, I'd be okay if I didn't sit here.
So your desire stayed where it was, your resistance went away, and there you are. That's how it works, isn't it?
So my question, it'll get a little, I guess, emotional for me. Seeing as around the theme of Father's Day, I'm also in tune with like Louise Hay. My question's about forgiveness and feeling good. How do I feel good when I still have or hold, and I know this, some resentment towards my parents?
You can't.
So how do I let that go and feel good more of the time?
Well, you're gonna have to figure that one out, aren't you? What it comes down to is wanting to be in alignment more than you want to carry that forward. Let's say that something happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or it doesn't matter, and by now anything that happened even yesterday doesn't have to be a player in today's vibrational mix unless you introduce it through focusing on it. But what happens with most people is they bring it forward 19 years, 18, 17, 16, and yesterday, and so it's still active, and so it still serves as resistance to keep you from feeling all that you can feel. Think about receiving mode or not. Think about being in alignment with your inner being or not. So think about wanting to find thoughts of satisfaction about your parents and finding a mutual thought with your inner being about them. Or think about finding the thoughts that you've been thinking maybe with others who are also physically focused. In other words, in your mind, see the difference between finding the perspective of your inner being or finding the perspective of the way much of the world would look at it. Forgiveness is not looking back and finding redemption and undoing and fixing and coming to peace with something. What forgiveness is choosing this instead of this. That's all forgiveness is. What people call forgiveness is simply that. Your inner being will never need to forgive anyone because your inner being will never condemn anybody to begin with. Your inner being always stays here. Your inner being only looks for positive aspects of every subject that your inner being focuses upon. Isn't that interesting? So what's the difference between you and your inner being? You came to explore contrast. Your inner being said, we'll stay stable so that you will have something to use as your guiding light to show you who you really are.
But my desire is to get here in this situation in particular, and I feel like I've not been there yet.
You'll hear this easily. The best way to forgive your parents is to think about a barbecue grill. Or we just use that because we talked about it earlier. If you're not doing the opposite, you will be in that place of alignment. So it isn't about what you want to do, it's about those things you're no longer going to do, which is focus and keep active the thing that's keeping you from rising to the vibration of your inner being. The cork will float on the water, and let's call that forgiveness or alignment, unless you hold it under the water. So every time you talk about the subjects that you're trying to forgive, you don't let your cork float. Instead, you hold yourself in that mutuality. Does that make sense to you? So what's the logical, practical thing that you're going to focus on starting now relative to this subject?
I don't know.
Do you think the path of least resistance is to focus on your parents and find a way to understand it, or to focus on things that are easy to feel good about?
Similarly to the last person who was here, I live a lot farther away from my parents, and focusing on my life now and choosing to live my best life now and focusing on those things has deterred me away from thinking about them. But when I do, it goes back down.
Well, that's because a thought is where you last left it. And so if this were a subject other than parents or money or love or something that you just can't help but think about, we would say just change the subject and you'll be good. So you'll find forgiveness by distraction, the law of distraction. But since you're tied to so many thoughts, then it's not easy to distract yourself. So little by little you want to find more satisfying thoughts, but you can't find more satisfying thoughts all at once. So we have some questions for you. This will really make sense to you. These are easy to hear, easy to answer questions, but really meaningful. You're going to feel things shift. Do you think that it would be, let's just say, easier? Would there be more ease in trying to undo thoughts about your parents that have bothered you, or to just not think about them at all?
Just not think about them at all.
Do you think that it would be easier to just not think about them at all, or to think about some other things?
Think about other things.
Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Do you think that when you're thinking about other things, that occasionally they might get into the mix sort of accidentally?
Yes.
Do you think when that happens you would notice the dip in how you're feeling, and that you might be able to do something about it then?
Yes and no. I notice it. It's working on.
But here's the bigger question. Is what you want connection with your inner being or something else?
What I want is to feel good when I'm thinking those thoughts.
Is your desire connection with your inner being, which is what the receiving mode is, or something else?
Receive.
To be in the receiving mode. That's really what you're going for. Is your desire to feel good and therefore to be in the receiving mode? Mm-hmm. Is it easier to be in the receiving mode when you think about some subjects than others?
Yes.
When you find things that you feel satisfied about and therefore in the receiving mode about, does it seem logical to you that that would get easier and easier to do?
Yes.
Does it feel logical to you that just by deciding that you could just say, I'm not going to think about my parents for a while, I'm going to think about the receiving mode, and I'm going to think about satisfying thoughts? Is it logical to you that your ability to focus onto satisfying thoughts would become keener and keener, that you'd get better and better at it?
Yes.
And does it also feel logical that still, even when you get better, when you think back about your parents, that you would dip?
Yes.
Does it seem logical that the more you find yourself in the receiving mode and the more you feel satisfaction, that the less it matters whether you think about them or not?
Yes.
Do you believe that you could start to feel like figuring it out is less necessary and just feeling good is more necessary, so it's not the big thing that you've always made it out to be?
Feeling good.
Does it seem that being in the receiving mode becomes a lighter, easier thing than forgiving your parents?
Yes.
Yeah. And is forgiving your parents being in the receiving mode?
I'd like it to be.
But does being in the receiving mode mean you have to forgive your parents?
No, I can just receive.
You can do it the hard way or the easy way.
Choose easy. Got it.
Enough?
Yes.
Really good.
Thank you.